Stage and Screen with Andy Snowden. Let us know what you want to hear on WhatsApp with the number 01978 540 410. We love local. Calon FM.
The aim of this government is to make everyone as miserable as possible.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up already!
Look what you've done with the NHS.
No Clause 28, Boy George, kicking off this very special stage and screen show with me, Andy Snowden. Today, December the 1st, marks World AIDS Day, known this year as World AIDS Day 35, Remember and Commit. And on S4C tonight at 9pm is a very special documentary marking 20 years since the Section 28 or Clause 28 was abolished in this country. The documentary, in English called Don't Say Gay, is brought to us by local West End and television actor Stifyn Parri. And I caught up with Stifyn earlier this week to ask about the Clause 28, how he managed to navigate an existence as a young gay man in the UK back in the 1980s. And of course, we talked about his incredible career in show business so far. So with deep joy, I welcome back to the Stage and Screen Show, Calon FM, Stifyn Parri.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
How are you? Are you alright?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm very pleased to be speaking to you again.
Well, I can hear you smiling. Well, I'm laughing now.
Oh yeah, definitely. I got a funny feeling. I got to be smiling for that throughout the whole of this. We better start by talking about your career, really, because you've had a career over the years that'll, well, frankly, would make most actors envious, right?
Well, the thing is, maybe, but I always wanted. My favourite word in life is more. So I always want to do more. But yeah, I've done okay for a freelance. Yeah.
But I've heard you say in the past that people assume that you came out of the womb all singing, all dancing, but that's not necessarily the case. Is that right?
Well, no, and I think my mother would have been very pleased about that. Otherwise, I would have damaged her, I would imagine, especially with that top hat. But no, I think I came out of the womb as a lot of second children, wondering how I was going to deal with life being compared with the person that had come out from there before me.
Very true.
I had a brother who was an academic, and I definitely didn't want to go that way, and I needed to find my own light and my own platform, really. So I did that literally. And on my first day of school at the age of 3, I asked the headmistress whether I could organise a play on Friday, and wrote a play. Obviously, I gave myself the lead role, and my friends had smaller parts, and people who didn't want to be in my play had to clap. So for me, it was a win-win situation, and that's where I started at the age of 3, every Friday, making sure that I was centre stage in every school I was at until my A-levels.
But you grew up in Gross, and
yeah.
Your mum and dad.
Lived there. I lived there. I don't know whether I grew up, but I did live there.
But your mum and dad famously had, possibly the most favourite chip shop in Gross. And if somebody owns a chip shop, then they're almost celebrities in their own right, really. Does that wash off on you, I wonder?
No. Well, my mother was yes, she was the queen of the fish and chips. And she was the star of the show, and I was Stephen back in Stephen Madeline the chip shop son for a long, long time. And then I thought I'd flip that round, and then all of a sudden she became Madeline Stephen's mother. So, she had a moment, and then I had mine. But yes, I did love her fish and chips, hence my hips, really.
Yeah. And you've talked about your very, very early drama days, but you go on to join the Clwyd Youth Theatre, who, they were called a youth theatre, but they took themselves very seriously and put out some almost semi-professional work back in the day.
Absolutely, and I remember, because I was a member of the ERV and all these Welsh institutions, and all of a sudden I joined Clwyd Youth Theatre, and I thought, oh my God, these are a bit professional. Yeah. This is a bit above me. And they were pretty avant-garde compared to everything else I was a member of. I remember seeing girls sitting on girls' knees and boys holding each other's hands, and I'm going, oh my God, what's this?
Yeah.
What is going on? But no, I had a great time in Courage Youth Theatre and met a lot of great people like yourself, and then went back to teach, which was also nice because it's nice to give back too.
But I can remember because when I joined back in, I joined in about 1986, I think, and and everybody was well aware of you, and they were very well aware of everything that you had achieved at that point, even.
Well, I mean, the thing is, up until now, I mean, I'm much older now, but at that time, I was always very, very driven, and I was very single-minded in what I wanted to do, and even people such as Marius Jones, my old schoolmate, who, you know, is doing miraculously well now. Even he reminded me not so long ago that when he was at school, nobody knew what they wanted to do, but Stifyn Parri did from the first day. And no bugger was going to stop him either. You know, I've had a few setbacks by teachers or various people who sort of tried to cancel me or diss me, and you know, it just didn't work. It just fueled my drive even further.
But you went to the Guildhall, right? The Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And if nobody,
mucus and trauma, I like to call it.
Mucus and trauma. It's a great nickname for it for more reasons than one. But if anybody isn't aware of the Guildhall, it's essentially one of the biggest drama schools. It's a 3-year course, but you only did one of them.
Yeah,
you left
early.
Did
one of them. Yeah, it's one of the top 5 drama schools. I was fortunate enough to be offered a part, and then I met a friend of mine who was auditioning for a new soap opera on a new channel called S4C. This is how old I am.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if he's having an audition, so can I. So I rang up, and they said, oh, the auditions have been. And I said, oh, but you haven't seen me yet, and I'll be in Cardiff in 2 weeks' time. And they said, no, we've actually done all the auditions. And I said, yeah, but I am going to be in Cardiff. Can you at least see me? And I was that forthright. And I walked into the room, and I could see there was a very nervous man there. And I asked him, was he nervous? Because, you know, was he nervous about his audition? And he said, no, I'm the producer. And all of a sudden I got the part. So, you know, that was my first job. So I left Guildhall. I was really upset to leave. I had 5 farewell dues, 4 I organised myself, obviously. But I just didn't want to leave. But I had to leave because I was going to learn far more professionally on the studio floor than I would have in drama school.
Yeah. And you stayed there for 2 years, right?
I was there for, God, you've stalked me. You seem to know more about me than I know myself. What's my favourite colour? No. Yes, I was there for 2 years, and then I decided I wanted to go and do some work in English, which lots of the Welsh actors turned on me and thought I was turning my back on the language, and I was being an absolute traitor, and I was crossing the boundaries. And I thought, well, what boundary is this, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I've got 2 languages. I want the biggest bank account, the biggest house, the biggest career, the biggest opportunities, and the biggest fun I can have. Why am I not going to use every tool I've got in the box?
Yeah.
And the Welsh language is not going to die because I was maybe playing a Welshman in an English play. It was going to probably help. Anyway, I took no notice of them, and off I went to do some stuff. And then I got an audition for Brookside. So I went to do that, which I absolutely loved. And I did for another 2 years.
Well, Brookside, I think arguably was, that was to affect you in more ways than one, professionally and personally, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. My agent rang me, who was a little bit homophobic, and she said, you know, you've got an audition for Gordon's friend. And she said the word friend, like the way my mother used to say the word hysterectomy. You know, she sort of half said it. And I hopped on a train for 5.5 hours, tried to learn the accent, which I can't tell you the story because it's far too rude. But if anybody wants to buy my book, it's in there. And I tried to learn the accent. I got to Brookside. I met Phil Redmond, who was the king of TV at the time, created Grange Hill, Brookside, and Hollyoaks. And as I was sitting down, having spent 5.5 hours in a toilet trying to say those and those that the Liverpudlians do, he said, "Oh, by the way, your character's Welsh." And I said, "I'm sorry?" I said, "I've just spent 5.5 hours in a toilet." Anyway, while I was doing the audition, the camera that they were filming me on fell on the floor, so I jumped on the floor with it and carried on acting, lying with my face on the floor, looking down the lens, and they seemed to think I could cope with anything. So they gave me the job, and I was meant to be there for 2 episodes, and I ended up there for 2 years.
And it was a massive part in a massive soap at the time. It was Channel 4's highest viewed program, not even a sitcom. And you were playing Christopher Duncan, if anybody doesn't remember, and you were the boyfriend of Gordon. And I think it was testament to Phil Redmond and indeed all the writers at Brookside that they weren't afraid to approach things that people were calling taboo back then.
You're absolutely right. I met Phil recently in the programme which I'm promoting, which is why I'm talking to you. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I would never talk to you, Andy. But the programme that's going to be on SLC tonight, I actually go back and talk to Phil Redmond in the programme. And yes, it was his idea that Gordon would be gay, and it was his idea that after a year of me taking the part and not having any gay storylines at all, we had a gay peck on the cheek.
Yep.
And all of a sudden that ended up on the 9 o'clock news. The next day I was on the Clause 28 march with Ian McKellen.
Yep.
And that became quite a huge piece of history. And we were marching against Clause 28, which is what the programme is that's on this evening. It's about how things have moved on in the last 20 years since the demise of the clause. And yeah, that was massive. It was absolutely massive for me because although people know I'm gregarious and outgoing and full of confidence, I hadn't come out at that time. So when I did the first Gay Kiss on British Telly and ended up on the 9 o'clock news and was speaking with Sue Johnston at the march in front of the world press and 18,000 people, I still hadn't come out.
I was going to ask you, because I've spoken to you about this a few times, but I've never actually asked you if that was, for want of a better word, was it an exciting thing to be headline news on the BBC, or was it extremely scary?
It was both. I absolutely love attention, as you well know, but at the same time, I was hiding, which is why I've divulged so much for the first time in this documentary that's on this evening, because nobody knew, or some people suspected, other people had no idea at all. My best friend who was here last week still didn't believe me till a year afterwards that I'd come out. She wouldn't accept it. But we've got to remember that our mindset was very, very different then. When I was born, being homosexual was against the law. So as soon as I was born, I was cancelled. And I haven't really realised this until I've done this documentary and realised I was born in quite an interesting time in history, especially being gay. And although I was confident and loved the attention, and when Ian McKellen said, "Come and walk on the march," I thought, oh yes, I'm going to be like the Pope. But at the same time, I was hiding my biggest playing card, which was to be absolutely truthful. You know, my sexuality isn't the most important thing in my life. It's part of my character, and it's as boring as everybody else's sexuality. But unless you can be genuine and be your truthful self, what is the point of being on this earth? And there's so many people we know that go to their graves never actually being their authentic selves. And I think that's absolutely tragic. There's a clip in the programme that's going out tonight of me on a chat show where it's a Welsh chat show where the presenter says, you know, "Stifyn, you're playing a gay character," and there was a word in Welsh for gay at the time, which I didn't like at all. And it was called Guru Gadyur, which basically literally translated meant man grabber.
Wow.
And I stopped him in his tracks live on telly and I said, can I just correct you there? I'm not playing a man grabber. This is why we as a nation are so blinkered that we use these sort of words. He's not a man grabber. He's homosexual. He happens to love somebody of the same sex. I had the confidence and the audacity to stop this chat show host in his tracks, but I still didn't say that I was gay.
I'll tell you what I find rather interesting as well from Brookside. We're not going to talk about Brookside all afternoon, by the way. But your kiss, the first gay kiss between two men, was 1985, and it wasn't until almost 10 years later that the women's first gay kiss. And I wonder if society just wasn't ready for women being gay at that time.
I think you're probably right. And there was even more taboo about being lesbian, which is why I think everybody always remembers the lesbian kiss and not the gay one.
Yeah, yeah.
Anna Friel, springboard Anna Friel into the big world of showbiz. But again, Phil Redmond was an absolute genius. He has his finger on society's pulse constantly. There was a scene he told me recently, and sadly this isn't in the programme this evening, because I've spent my whole year filming this show, and I go back to Roche, and I go back to the Stute, and I go back to, you see, the room where I came out to my mother, and all sorts of things, and I go back to Morgan Llwyd, but he told me that there was a scene where there was a shot of myself, my character, and Gordon's character in bed, and it was the end of an episode, and then they saw us both sleeping in the bed, and then Paul Collins, Gordon's father, would see us and react, and it would be the sort of duff moment. Well, in the midweek showing of that, apparently there were 80 complaints to Ofcom, so Channel 4 demanded that Phil Redmond cut that the shot of us two sleeping in bed. All we were doing is sleeping before they went out again for the omnibus, and Phil was very, very strong and confident and said, no, I won't cut it. If you want to cut it, I'll send you the tape. You can do it. Yeah. So for the omnibus, they cut that scene out, and all you saw was the bedroom door opening and Gordon Collins' father's face. And there were 360 complaints because everybody's imagination was far worse than what was actually in the script. Which
absolutely.
Two men sleeping.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can remember that.
How amazing that Phil actually, he relied on Channel 4. That was his income. And he refused them. And hats off to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Hey, listen, I'm going to take a bit of a break here for some music, but when we come back, we're going to talk about your other big productions in the West End of London. We're going to play this one from. This is actually you. It's Son from the musical Metropolis. We'll talk about it in a moment.
Okay.
Is this a game? This is mad.
And I love Son, by the way. I don't know if I told you last time I sang it in college, my drama teacher. So.
Yeah, you did. It's not an easy song to sing, is it?
Oh my God, it was unbelievable. But I didn't know it was you, and I thought, when I first heard it, and I recorded it, I think, for last time we spoke. And I remember thinking, I've heard this before. Hold on, I did it in college. Oh my God, it's Stephen. Incredible. Anyway, so that's you as George in Metropolis in London. An absolutely incredible production was Metropolis, but it was pretty doomed, wasn't it, that one, I think?
Well, it was doomed in the fact that it did last 9 months, but they did pour a lot of American money into it, and I was just happy to be in a musical because typical Stifyn Parri, I just said, I'm off to London, I'm going to be in a musical, and I did go. I didn't go get a part in the chorus. I went and got a nice part with a solo, and it was a lovely solo, and I met some amazing people, and I met a partner that I ended up with for 16 years, And frankly, I had a ball, and it then led on to other stuff.
Yeah. But it was, I seem to remember at the time, because it seemed almost every other night something went right. It was such a technical show, wasn't it, that was the main downfall of it, I think.
It was 5.5 tons of metal floating on air, so obviously something was going to go wrong. Yeah. And it was based on Fritz Lang's film, and it was very much futuristic, obviously, to anybody seen that film. But of course, it was ahead of its time technically, which meant every so often things went a little bit wrong, but that was fine. When I didn't have to sing "The Sun Never Shines," the show came down early, and I used to go to a restaurant and have steak and chips. Every crowd.
But I think arguably your biggest theatrical role was Marius in Les Mis, and I read in your biography, which you mentioned earlier, and I forgot to name it. It's called Out With It, still available to buy. And that was such a tough process for you before you even started in the show, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it was tough. The Metropolis came to an end. I went to do some theatre. I auditioned for Phantom of the Opera. I had 11 recalls. I learned the whole show. It was between me and another guy, and they gave him the part, and I was furious because I thought it was in the bag, and I thought he had a bit of a wobbly voice. Anyway, he got the job, and 6 weeks later, I had a call from Sir Cameron McIntosh's office offering me a much better part than the part that the other guys got, and that was Marius. And for me at that time, it was a really suitable part. And bizarrely, I'd shared a flat with Michael Ball when he was creating the part, so I knew all the ins and outs of it, and I'm glad of that, because I literally had 2 weeks rehearsal and I was on.
The thing that gets me about your story about Les Mis is, we'll talk about it because this is basically what your documentary is about this evening, but you had to take secret AIDS tests. I mean, this was the 1980s, so not so surprising, but the fact that it was all secret, and how many of those did you have to do?
Well, let's put it into context first. I'd come out during Brookside. I'd then gone from feeling like I was the only gay in the village to being in the West End, where, heterosexuals were few and far between. Yeah. So I'd gone from one extreme to another. I'd fallen head over heels with a guy, and we were in a very long monogamous relationship. In fact, we were together for 16 years. And he sadly suffered from a lot of mental health issues at the time. We just got over, there was this horrendous AIDS epidemic, which I tried to ignore stupidly and hid my head because I didn't want anything else that was going to feed anybody else's prejudice against me to make things worse for me. And then Clause 28 came along, where Thatcher made out that nobody was allowed to even mention in education at all that anybody within the LGBTQ plus community even existed. So, we were not only coming out, I had those two other big cards playing against me. My partner at the time was feeling very, very low and was convinced that he shouldn't be living and thought he was dying of cancer, and then he thought he had HIV. And I thought, well, if he's thinking he's got HIV, maybe this relationship hasn't been as monogamous as I thought, and therefore I should, out of absolute sensibility, go and have an HIV test, which I did, I think, 3 HIV tests during the 2 years while I was on Brookside, without anybody ever knowing at all. I've only discussed it for the first time in this program this evening. And that time you had to pay for the test, and you also had to wait weeks for the results. But while I was waiting for the results, tragically, I was on the stage singing Empty Chairs and Empty Tables, and those lyrics were a killer for me every night. Yeah. There's a grief that can't be spoken. There's a pain goes on and on. Empty chairs at empty tables. Now my friends are dead and gone. And people were going, "Oh, I really loved the angle you took on that this evening. It was really more special." And I felt like saying, if only you knew where that song was coming from tonight.
Yeah.
And I couldn't share that with anybody because of the stigma. I'd only just come out of the closet, and where I'd realised and was celebrating that people actually accepted me, and then all of a sudden, everything else turned against us.
Well,
So
we should talk. I think people they almost forgot about the AIDS epidemic because it seemed to be huge in the 80s and then seemed to disappear.
It was. And it was all aimed at the gay community.
Yeah.
There were commercials on telly with huge tombstones falling down and a voice of John Hurt saying, "You're all going to die." You know, can you imagine during COVID, if there'd have been commercials like that, what effect it would have had on everyone?
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And that's the effect it had on us.
Yeah. We'll pause again for some more music. In a moment, we're going to talk about your documentary that's on tonight. It's an incredible bit of work. Stifyn Parri with us. This I think is perfect. It's the Pet Shop Boys. It's a sin.
Yes.
So let's talk about your documentary then. It's on tonight, S4C 9 p.m. In English, it's Don't Say Gay, right? What's the Welsh translation, please?
The Welsh translation is Paid Hoyw.
Right.
Try saying that with your mouth full.
I couldn't say it on a good Friday. I've got to be honest with you.
No, you couldn't say it if you went on a course, Andy. Could you really?
You've described this as one of the most important programmes you've ever made. Tell us why.
Yes. Oh, it's really personal. It's really important. When I was approached by Rondo Media to do this, I was approached to do two documentaries, actually. One to work with them on my friend Sean Phillips's 90th celebration. And also they wanted to do one on the demise of 20 years since the Clause 28. And they wanted me to present it. And I said, oh, I don't want you to take for granted that I know all about this, because I said I'm not a political person, and I literally hid my head like a lot of people, like Russell T. Davis, who wrote It's a Sin. That's one of the reasons he approached It's a Sin, because he went back to re-look at a period in his time that he buried his head away from everyone at the same time. So a lot of us, he's spoken about that publicly. So I said I would do it, but I needed to learn a lot about Clause 28 while I was doing the programme, and I didn't want the audience to think that I knew all about it, because I was ignorant for a very good reason, because it was self-preservation. So I learned a lot about the whole cause, and I learned more about my life and my sexuality and my psyche during this programme than I have ever done for the rest of the 60 years I've been on this world. It's, through the editor and the producer and the director's eyes, my life now seems to make far more sense than it did before I started the programme.
But you've also described it as feeling like you were coming out in public for the second time. Explain that.
Well, literally because of the story I've just shared with you is one of them, is the fact that, I had never told anybody. My mother passed away a year ago. Yeah. I never told her that I'd had HIV test. I've never told anybody because the stigma at the time stays with you. I also thought at the time that I had quite an outrageous and dramatic and awkward coming out. But I also meet other people in the show, such as the author John Sam Jones, who had the most horrendous coming out because he couldn't accept, and none of his community could accept his sexuality. So rather than tell his mother and father that he was gay, he booked himself into Denbigh Hospital to have electric therapy, so that every time he had a gay thought, he would be electrocuted. And obviously that didn't work. No. He became really depressed and had a nervous breakdown. So, that made me cry in the programme, because all I'd done is come out on the 9 o'clock news and ended up doing a speech in front of the whole world, which is far better than what he went through.
But
so there's been lots of things that have been uncovered. For example, the bizarre serendipity of the whole thing. It was my 60th year on this planet when they asked me to do the program. I take the cameras back to my home where my mother used to live, and I had nothing to do with the scheduling. And bizarrely, I ended up at my mother's front door, literally a year to the day that she died, which was very poignant. I then was taken without knowing to the Stute in Rose, and then I sat in the auditorium by myself, and up on the screen came cine footage of my childhood with me and my mother and my father and my brother in Prestatyn on holiday as a child.
Wow.
So I've been through all these amazing things. Then I went, as I touched on earlier, I went to interview Phil Redmond, who was my boss at Brookside, and I was able to thank him because it was really thanks to him and the writers that I had the coming out that I did, and that I learned so much about what it was going to be like to be an out gay man beforehand through their eyes in the script.
Yeah.
Probably written by heterosexual men, but it really did help me.
But it's been 20 years since the clause or the section 28 was scrapped.
Yeah.
Can you just explain for everybody that isn't quite aware of what the clause was, what it was at the time?
Yeah, well, in fact, in the programme, I actually go to the Houses of Parliament and actually see it written in the proper parchment. We were there with rubber gloves on and security, making sure we weren't touching the paper. It was basically a clause that actually banned any promotion at all of anything other than heterosexuality to be discussed or in any literature in education throughout. So if you were a child being bullied for being gay or lesbian or trans or whatever at that time, there is nothing the school could do about it. There was nowhere you could go. There was no book that would be able to help. And not only if you were a pupil, but what if you were a teacher?
It's
bonkers.
It does. I mean, it beggars belief.
All it did is feed homophobia even more.
But it's the plight of individual boys and girls which worries me most. Too often, our children don't get the education they need, the education they deserve. And in the inner cities, where youngsters must have a decent education if they are to have a better future, that opportunity is all too often snatched from them by hard-left education authorities and extremist teachers. Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
And Thatcher's speech, quite a famous speech now, of course, back in 1987, that's just over 30 years ago. It seems so alien now, doesn't it?
It does. I'm amazed. But, you know, as you said, it's 20 years since that stupid clause has gone to make out the people like myself as second-rate citizens, or even not second-rate, that we're cancelled, that we're absolutely cancelled.
Yeah.
But what is people in Wales that are people who have been killed because they're gay?
Yeah.
Now, today, there are people bullied, there are people that I know that still haven't come out in show business, haven't come out in college, haven't come out in their families. There are people going to their graves not being their authentic selves. And let's forget whether it's about sexuality or anything. You really shouldn't go through life without being the best version of you.
Absolutely, and I think it's. I always find it bizarre now, especially with sports stars, because people say. They seem to say, oh, on average, there must be at least one professional football player. And you think, well, on average, in reality, there should be at least 10 in every team.
Yes, yeah.
But people, they can't get their head around it, really.
No, and a lot of people are bisexual, and that's got a taboo that people won't talk about. You know, I meet a lot of people now that are totally closeted and deeply unhappy about that. And therefore they are living a lie. And I just don't think with today's pressures, that anybody's mental health should have to deal with that.
Yeah. And I read an article this morning about your experience and the Nigel Owens, the rugby ref, your experience of coming out, which has been documented in the book "It's Okay to Be Gay." But you both admit that you fought against it in the early days, which sounds like people are still doing it.
Absolutely, I remember pointing the finger at people at Clwyd Youth Theatre for being gay. And that was because I wanted to take the spotlight off me.
Yeah.
And I'm ashamed that I did that, but I also understand the reason I did that was for my own survival, because I was brought up in a village where you really had to blend in. And I never wanted to blend in any which way possible. I'm the only person in Wales, I think, that's never been in a choir because I wanted to be a soloist. I do not blend in very well, as you can tell. I never have. But, why can you not love the person you love? It doesn't make any sense at all.
No, none at all. I was going to ask you about there was a Piers Morgan, excuse my language. There was a Piers Morgan article in The Sun, again, excuse my language, back in 1989 after the kiss between Colin and Guido, played by Michael Cashman and Nicholas Donovan. That was back in 1989, and it was so cutting. It's almost like it's written by a child. If you read it now, let me just read a little bit of it for you. It says, furious MPs last night demanding a ban on EastEnders after the BBC soap showed two gay men kissing full on the lips. The homosexual love scene between yuppie puffs, Colin and Guido, was screened in the early evening when millions of children were watching. Tory Terry Dix stormed, it's absolutely disgraceful that their revolting scenes went out at 7:30. If the BBC, he continued, can't stop showing these perverted practices during family viewing time, then it's time EastEnders was screened at 11 p.m. or scrapped altogether. Then he goes on to do the obligatory vote of the readers on whether what they think should happen, and you can almost lay your mortgage on the fact that they all agreed with yes. They're all being told what to think by the media. Is that the same in your experience?
I'm so glad you've read that out, because I'm absolutely gobsmacked that we used to accept that sort of writing. Yep. I'm hoping that even Piers Morgan, excuse my French, is embarrassed of that now.
Well, he did apologise in 2020. He said, I'm ashamed of some of the inappropriate language I used in The Sun 30 years ago about gay stars.
It's not the language, it's the attitude, isn't it?
Yeah. They were different times, he claims, but I was 18 at the time, and I would never have done that.
What was really nice that you reminded me then is that I put a little piece on my social media on Facebook and Twitter, and I had the most amazing, two lovely, very supporting messages back publicly from Michael Cashman, who's now a politician, of course. Right. And he actually thanked me, can you believe, when it's him that's done all the work, him and Ian McKellen. He was thanking me for what I've done for the cause and for doing the documentary, which I was so chuffed about.
I can't wait to see it, actually. It's on tonight, isn't it? It's 9 p.m. on S4C.
9 p.m. It's subtitled for those who don't speak Welsh as well. And then it'll be on Click on S4C after it's gone out at 9 o'clock. And then it'll be on iPlayer.
Brilliant. Let me ask you about Doctor Who. Last week, the new series of Doctor Who started, and for the first time there was a trans character, Rose, played by Yasmin Finney, which has been described as very brave from Russell T Davies. Would you concur?
Absolutely. I mean, it wouldn't have happened without Russell T Davies. I mean, I do think the man he walks on water. He's quite amazing. He's so ahead of his time. And if I had a child now that was trans, at least they'd have some representation or whatever on screen. I didn't have any representation at all, apart from very camp, clowny-like game show hosts when I was young.
Very true.
You know, and if you remember, when we were young, we were so naive as people. Nobody was allowed to say gay, but Morecambe and Wise were allowed to be in bed together for the beginning of every sketch.
Yeah, very true. I forgot all about that.
When I did a bedroom scene with on Brookside, where we were only sleeping, we had a whole pamphlet from Mary Whitehouse telling us what we should be wearing and which way we should be facing.
Yeah.
It's bonkers. Yeah. Anyway, let's hope this programme that's on tonight helps, eh?
Absolutely. Stifyn Parri, it is always an absolute pleasure to speak to you, my friend. I love your work, and you're an absolute inspiration to so many people, me included. Keep up the great work, my friend.
Thank you very, very much, and I'll see you in court.
So it's called don't say gay. I was going to say don't be gay. Then it's not that at all. Don't say gay.
No, don't say gay, because in Florida there is a campaign now to actually ignore it again, just like Clause 28 was.
Right.
And there's 64 countries where it's against the law. It's absolutely bonkers.
Absolutely.
Anyway, watch it. Thank you so much for this, Andy.
No problem at all. It's always a pleasure, my man.
Speak to you soon.
Take care. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Stifyn Parri on a very special stage and screen show. And don't forget, 9 p.m. this evening, S4C, Don't Say Gay. That is the Welsh translation, the documentary about the Clause 28. Fantastic.
Stage and Screen with Andy Snowden. Let us know what you want to hear on WhatsApp with the number 01978 540 410. We love local. Calon FM.